Some people will never walk. Some will never hear their own voice. Right now, while you watch this, there is a child being abused somewhere in the world. And yet people still call this the miracle of life. But no one asked to be born. That is not just a dark joke from the internet. It is a serious truth. When a woman gets pregnant, the world celebrates. Families gather, people smile, and everyone praises the arrival of new life. But almost no one stops to ask, what exactly is being created? Because it is not just a baby, it is a future story, a future statistic, a future that might be filled with pain, betrayal, and endless struggle. That baby could grow up to fight cancer, could be abandoned by the person they love most, could spend decades working only to die still in debt, could be beaten by an alcoholic father, could pray for death before even reaching adulthood. But when people look at a newborn, no one talks about that side of reality. They just say it is a blessing. The philosopher David Benatar dares to say what most people never want to hear. Bringing someone into existence is not an act of love, it is an act of cruelty. And he does not say it out of anger, he says it with logic, with courage, and with brutal honesty. Here is the problem. Suffering is guaranteed, while pleasure is optional. Yet we keep treating life as if it is always a gift, when for many it feels more like a debt that can never be repaid, interest collected in the form of pain. Every time a baby is born, it's like spinning a roulette wheel. Maybe that child will live a good life, or maybe they will be murdered at 6 years old by a stray bullet. Maybe they will grow up to become a genius who changes the world, or maybe they will end up homeless, ignored by everyone, dying alone in the street. And still, society claps at the sound of a baby's first cry. We treat it as an act of love, when often it is an act of ignorance, ego, or pure convenience. In his book, Better Never to Have Been, Benatar writes, "Existence brings pain. Non-existence brings nothing. Nothing does not miss pleasure, but existence feels pain. And that is enough to make birth a mistake." That is the core of what we are exploring here. The idea that life might not actually be a gift to give, but a burden to avoid. We are going to dive into anti-natalism, the philosophy that challenges the sacred idea of life itself. And we are not going to sugarcoat it, not with pretty words, not with romantic illusions, not with false comfort. Because the truth is, life is not a present. It is a contract you never signed, one written by someone else, and you are forced to pay for it every single day. Interest paid in blood, in tears, in disappointment. The people who say life is beautiful are usually just talking about their own edited version of their story. They highlight the good, they crop out the bad, and they call it meaning. But life is not an amusement park ticket. It is a sentence where suffering is mandatory and pleasure is a temporary and unstable bonus. The idea of life as a blessing is one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in human history. From the moment we are born, we are told to be grateful for life, even when it feels unbearable. Think about it. A child gets beaten and is told it is for their own good. A teenager with depression hears that other people have it worse. An elderly person abandoned in a hospital bed still feels guilty for complaining. This is what Benatar calls the pro-birth illusion, the false belief that being born is always worth it. He writes, "People overestimate the quality of their lives and underestimate how common suffering really is. This creates the belief that life is worth living. But the moment you walk outside and look around with open eyes, you see the truth. You see people waiting in hospital corridors for morphine that never arrives. You see children going to sleep hungry on mattresses on the floor. You see people laughing in public while silently dying inside. Where is the gift in that?" And these are not rare exceptions. According to the World Health Organization, more than 700,000 people die by suicide every year. That is nearly one person every 40 seconds. And those are just the recorded cases. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Almost 1 billion people live in extreme poverty. When you zoom out, life does not look like a blessing. It looks like a badly designed lottery. Some win comfort by genetic or geographic luck, others bleed every single day. Benatar insists that suffering matters more than pleasure. Why? Because suffering is deeper, heavier, and more permanent. You can live 5 years of happiness, but 5 seconds of tragedy can be enough to destroy everything. That is the heart of his theory, the asymmetry of suffering. Existence always carries pain. Non-existence carries none. And that makes non-existence not just neutral, but superior. Because where there is no awareness, there is no pain. Think of the pains that never leave. A mother who lost a child and never slept peacefully again. A man abused in childhood who spends his life dissociating. A woman with a chronic illness that feels like living in a cage of needles. A man who wakes up every day with no reason to keep going, but drags himself through anyway. These stories are everywhere, yet the cult of life asks us to ignore them, to look at a baby and only see hope, never the inevitable suffering that comes with existence. But suffering is not an accident of life. It is the gravitational center. It pulls everything toward it. Even the happiest person cannot escape the burden of empathy, because to truly feel means carrying the weight of knowing how much others are hurting. Benatar writes, most people live worse than they think. They are so used to their pain that they normalize it. What they call resilience may just be numbness. And that is the lie of the so-called gift of life. Life is sold as if it were an absolute good, but it has no guarantee, no return policy, no opt-out clause. You do not get to choose. You just get thrown into it. If you never existed, you would never cry, never be betrayed, never wake up at 3 a.m. with your heart in collapse. And you would not miss any of it either, because nothingness does not feel longing, emptiness, or despair. Benatar explains this idea through a simple equation. He offers 4 scenarios. If someone is born and feels pleasure, that is good. If someone is born and feels pain, that is bad. If someone is not born and does not feel pain, that is good. If someone is not born and does not feel pleasure, that is not bad because there is no one to miss it. This is the asymmetry at the heart of his philosophy. The absence of suffering is always good, even when no one exists to enjoy it. The absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is someone to regret missing it. And only existence can create someone capable of regret. This logic is hard to deny once you understand it clearly. Nobody cries for not having lived in the 14th century. Nobody mourns the fact that they missed the parties of ancient Rome. But millions today cry every day for simply being alive. Millions wish they had never been born. This is not abstract. It is real. A child born with a degenerative disease who will never run, never speak, never live past 10 years old. What is the justice in giving that existence? Or the baby born from rape, abandoned in an orphanage, growing up without love or safety? Or the teenager who at 13 already attempts suicide because they understand the world has no place for them? If these people had never been born, they would not have lost a miracle. They would have been spared an injustice. Benatar does not say that all life is constant misery. He admits there are good moments, but he insists those moments never outweigh the pain. Because pain carries more weight, and worse, pain is unavoidable, while pleasure is uncertain. You cannot guarantee joy. You can guarantee suffering. That is the imbalance. And in a world where suffering can be brutal, involuntary, and permanent, non-existence becomes the only truly safe option. This is the moral core of anti-natalism. The realization that not creating life is the only way to guarantee not causing harm. Think about it this way. Pleasure is a luxury. Suffering is a debt. You can live your entire life without huge joys, and nobody will call it tragic. But if you are tortured, abused, or shattered by grief, everyone agrees it is intolerable. Why? Because we instinctively know that suffering weighs more than happiness. Benatar says most people who claim life is worth living only say so because they are already alive. They are trapped in their own bias, unable to judge objectively whether existence is really a blessing. Culture has manipulated us into believing that being alive is always better than not. But that is not a fact, it is a belief. And like all beliefs, it mostly serves those who already exist, not those who have yet to be born. When a couple has a child, nobody asks the child if they want to exist, because deep down, everyone knows what the answer would be. Birth is the only act where one person imposes an entire lifetime on another, without consent, without escape, without an exit clause. And yet the parent is treated as a hero, as if they gave a gift, when in reality they may have condemned someone to a sentence. Benatar is blunt. No possible benefit justifies exposing someone to extreme suffering without their consent. That is the real ethical tension. No one is born by choice, and yet life is forced upon them. People like to say they have children out of love, but often that is not the truth. Many have children out of loneliness, out of vanity, out of social pressure, out of fear of dying alone, out of a desire to leave a piece of themselves behind, out of the hope of being loved unconditionally. This is what Benatar calls reproductive selfishness. If you ask someone, "Can I expose you to physical, emotional, and mental pain without guaranteeing you will enjoy it?" no one would ever say yes. But when it comes to creating a child, this forced contract is dressed up as poetry. It is called a miracle, but it is not a miracle. It is a unilateral, irreversible act, often driven by personal motives disguised as love. This is where anti-natalism separates itself from optimism, and even from common sense. Most people see life as a gift. They say, sure, it has pain, but it also has joy, and joy makes it worth it. Benatar calls this a trick of the mind. He argues that our brains are wired to overestimate the value of pleasure and underestimate the damage of suffering. We normalize pain, we adapt to misery, we cling to the few good moments and exaggerate their weight. This is what he calls the optimism bias. Imagine someone is in prison. They say, "It is not so bad, I get food, I can talk to other prisoners, sometimes they even laugh." They may sound content, but does that mean prison is good? No, it only means the prisoner has adapted to survive. In the same way, people adapt to life. They convince themselves it is better than it really is because admitting the truth would be unbearable. Think about how people talk about suffering. They call it character building. They call it part of the journey. They invent reasons why pain is necessary, why it has value. But is it really? Or is it just a defense mechanism to make torture sound noble? No one who is drowning wants to hear that suffocation builds character. The truth is, suffering has no guaranteed lesson. It can crush more than it teaches. It can destroy more than it strengthens. But people rarely admit this because they have no choice. They are already alive. They cannot undo existence, so they must make peace with it. This is why Benatar says most people are unreliable judges of whether life is good. They cannot be objective because they are forced to defend their own condition. It is like asking a soldier in the middle of war if the war was worth starting. What else can he say but yes? To admit otherwise would mean his suffering is meaningless. Humans fear meaninglessness more than pain. That is why they invent myths about life being sacred, about existence being inherently valuable. Without these myths, the truth becomes too heavy. Benatar cuts through these illusions with one simple question. If life is so good, why do people resist having more of it? Why do people dread aging, fear death, and fight against prolonging existence beyond a certain point? If life were truly a blessing, eternal life would be the highest dream. But almost no one wants to live forever. They only want to live long enough to have some pleasure, then end it before it becomes unbearable. This reveals the contradiction. People call life a gift, but they place strict limits on how much of it they want. The reason is simple, because life contains too much suffering, enough to make even endless pleasure not worth the cost. Imagine this, you are offered a machine that guarantees you constant joy, but with the risk that at some point, without warning, it may electrocute you with unbearable agony. Would you step into the machine? Most would say no. And yet that is exactly what life is. It offers moments of joy, but at any time without warning, it can crush you with pain so deep it erases all meaning. Death of a loved one, a terminal illness, a freak accident, a betrayal, a war. Life is not a safe bet. It is a gamble where the stakes are infinite and you never agreed to play. This is the hidden cruelty of birth. People are forced into the game without consent, then told they should be grateful for being allowed to play. Benatar says the reason people resist antinatalism is not logic but emotion. It threatens the foundations of family, religion, and culture. If he is right, then parents must accept they forced life onto their children. Religions must admit that creation is not a gift. Governments must stop treating population growth as progress. These truths are too uncomfortable, so people call them extreme, depressing, insane. But dismissing an argument does not disprove it. Reality remains. Wars keep happening, children keep starving, people keep killing themselves. Suffering does not vanish just because it is inconvenient to admit. And this is the weight of Benatar's philosophy. He is not offering hope, he is offering honesty, a kind of brutal clarity that most people spend their lives running from.
At the end of his book, Benatar faces the obvious question: if life is so bad, why not just end it now? His answer is subtle but important. He does not promote suicide. He says once you exist, there can still be reasons to continue. There are responsibilities, relationships, and moments that make endurance possible. The harm of dying can sometimes outweigh the harm of living. Suicide can create trauma for loved ones. It can cut short the few goods that life still offers. For those who already exist, the choice is complex. But for those who do not yet exist, the choice is simple. Non-existence avoids all harm without losing anything. Benatar separates two ideas: ending a life and not starting one. He sees them as completely different. Suicide ends a life that has already begun. Anti-natalism prevents the harm before it begins. Prevention is always safer than cure. That is why he insists the moral act is not to destroy life, but to stop creating it in the first place. This distinction is critical. Anti-natalism is not a cult of death. It is a philosophy of prevention, a refusal to gamble with someone else's pain. Benatar admits this is a hard truth. It goes against every instinct, every tradition, every hope humans cling to. People want to believe that life has meaning. They want to believe that creating new life is sacred. They want to believe suffering is worth it. But wanting something to be true does not make it true. Philosophy is not about comfort, it is about clarity. And clarity often hurts. Imagine the world if everyone accepted this idea. The population would decline. Fewer children would be born into poverty. Fewer lives would begin only to end in war or disease. The cycle of suffering would slowly unwind. Humanity would not vanish overnight. People would still live out their natural lives, but the chain of new suffering would stop. The world would become quieter, gentler, less cruel. Of course, this vision terrifies most people. They see it as the end of progress, the death of legacy, the collapse of meaning. But what is meaning if it is built on the suffering of innocence? What is progress if it demands billions of silent victims born only to endure pain they never asked for? These are the questions Benatar forces us to confront. He does not give easy answers because there are none. His work is not about offering solutions, it is about stripping away illusions. He exposes the hidden cost of existence, the price that every newborn pays simply by being forced into the world. In the end, his philosophy is less about despair and more about responsibility. Responsibility to stop pretending life is always good. Responsibility to see through the lies of culture. Responsibility to recognize that creating life is not neutral. It is a risk imposed on someone else, a risk with stakes too high to justify. Whether we accept or reject his conclusion, we cannot escape his challenge. Every birth is a gamble, and the house always wins. The only way not to lose is not to play. That is the brutal, undeniable logic of anti-natalism, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it.